This video is brought to you by Squarespace, an all-in-one platform for building a brand and growing your business online. Hello, my beautiful doves. My name is Mina, and I talk about fashion, media, culture, and the intersections between all of them. Today we're going to be talking about merch, aka things like band tees, Yankees baseball caps, the Rode Beauty phone case, movie merch, and Louis Vuitton lighters.
Very own merch.
Personally, despite what my appearance says today, I've never been a huge merch person. My family wasn't ever the type to buy tourist souvenirs like nameplates, which don't have my name anyway, or I Love New York t-shirts. So it was never like in my lexicon to wear something that I experienced per se. Actually, wait, hold on. Okay, so if you know my lore, you know that I love Idaho, and my friends and I, we do a group trip every so often to the Pacific Northwest. And last time that we went to Idaho together, we got nameplates. But because most of my friends also don't have, really popular names, we got like matching Angel Idaho nameplates. If you have a unique, beautiful name, and you're wanting to feed into the whole nameplate thing, get one that says Angel or something that says something cute. Anyways, as I was saying, I don't go to a lot of concerts either. I love music, but my actual seventh circle of hell is leaving a concert and dealing with the masses of people and the traffic. And then the bathroom situation is never the best, and I have a small bladder. So, I'm probably going to say I've been to like 7 concerts or music events in my entire life. I did go to Justin Bieber's Purpose Tour in 2016 because I was a believer. And I'm not ashamed, okay? Even then, I bought a beanie because it was the only thing I could afford at the time. And then I never wore it because I realized I looked awful in beanies, and I had just bought one to be part of the craze of it. But I didn't actually like what I had bought. So merch and me were never really friends. But then surprisingly, in the past year, I bought 2 Yankees baseball caps, and I also started collecting some vintage t-shirts. They're not band tees, but they're merch all the same. And I think the reason is I don't feel compelled to buy merch because I'm a fan of something, but I mostly buy merch because I'm in a big t-shirt and baseball cap phase of my personal style journey right now. And I feel like most t-shirts and baseball caps just happen to be merch. Saying that though, because I did grow up in the 90s and 2000s, I have embarrassment programmed in me. So I make sure that I do like whatever movie or band is present on the t-shirt that I own. Yeah. People in London must not feel the same way though, because when I was there, I have never seen so many Yankees baseball caps in my life outside of New York. And I know a lot of people that were wearing them have probably never been to New York and or probably don't even know that the logos is specifically Yankees affiliated and does not just generally mean New York. I had brought my Yankees cap with me, and it was to the point where I was embarrassed to wear it because I was like, this baseball cap doesn't mean anything here. Whereas in New York, it feels way more authentic, even if people are just wearing it for fashion, because, at least we're all in New York. And then I read Samuel Hines' GQ essay, The End of Merch, which was about the merch boom in 2019 and the subsequent fallout of it, which was interesting because, at the same time, I totally understood where he was coming from, but I feel like merch is still everywhere. As just an example, last year, the New York Times covered the Eras Tour merch craze happening in Tampa, Florida, prior to the concert. Fans were apparently camping out overnight beside merchandise trucks, with a report that by 8:30 a.m. next day, over 1,000 people were already waiting in line. While merch was still being sold inside the stadium during the concert, some Swifties were concerned that the merch lines would actually be worse in there because of the mania they saw captured on TikTok at other concert venues. Also, there was a specific cult item, a blue $65 sweatshirt that wasn't sold on the TaylorSwift.com website that fans were, dying to get their hands on, especially with the resale value going up to $300 online. Similarly, Joan Kennedy reported for the Business of Fashion in May that beauty brands are going viral for non-beauty products known as merch, such as Dior's special edition makeup bags, Rare Beauty's pale pink sweaters, and Milk Makeup's shoe collaboration. So is merch really dead, or what's happening? Today, I'm going to cover the history of merch, the oversaturation of merch, whether or not it matters that you don't know the band of the t-shirt you're wearing. Ooh, contentious. And the fast fashion impacts. So let's get started. It seems like everyone needs a website these days, but most of us didn't take any coding classes and aren't well versed in HTML, at least I'm not. If you don't know where to start, Squarespace has a bunch of website templates, and if none of them match your vibe, you can add customizations like different fonts, colors, and images really easily. Some people use websites to host their work, and Squarespace offers professional portfolio designs. You can display projects in customizable galleries and add password-protected pages to share private work with clients. Other people want to open an e-commerce store, and Squarespace aids you in selling anything from physical products to membership subscriptions, complete with sales analytics, of course. Check out squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/MinaLight to get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain.
Your first t-shirts have arrived.
Okay, so I first want to talk about the definition of merchandise because I think it can be confusing how exactly merch expanded beyond concert t-shirts to now include fashion designer collaborations. Samuel Hine defines merch generally as any branded item of clothing or accessory that is distributed to promote something, like a New Yorker tote bag or Beyonce Renaissance tour tee. Merch, thus, is like a marketing material. It's a way for people to endorse a business, a musician, a TV show, in part to use it to align themselves with a fandom or subculture. Artist Andrew Kuo, who is a designer of merch himself, explains that merch signals people who are like-minded. It's a way to come together. Anna Angelique and Eugene Rabkin go even further to cite any object that has a symbolic relevance and include items like J.W. Anderson's pigeon bag as an example of merch. They write, status signaling luxury items today also act as merch as they carry connotations of social and economic standing. High margin items that luxury brands produce, like keychains, scarves, or lipsticks, are merch, as they act as signifiers of social class and give their owners association with social and economic status. Anything can be turned into merch if infused with enough symbolic value and cultural capital. So merch can include a wide range of products, but I think because the band tee is probably the most prolific merch item, I want to talk about its history in particular. So it's difficult to actually discern when the first band tee was produced, but Amber Easby and Henry Oliver note in their book, The Art of the Band T-shirt, that the earliest example available is an Elvis t-shirt from 1956, which may have either been made by a fan or used as promotional material. Journalist Rin Tanaka credits the Monkees as the first band to have their own successful merchandising company. Apparently, they sold t-shirts on their first US tour in 1967. However, technically, if you want to be technical, the Beatles had t-shirts for sale 3 years earlier during their first tour of the US in 1964, but they didn't own their own merchandise. The Beatles' manager, Brian Epstein, licensed their merchandising rights to Nicky Byrne for only 1% of the profits. The t-shirts were obviously a major hit. Tony Barrow, the Beatles publicist from 1963 to 1968, said, in merchandising terms, the only possible comparison was Walt Disney. In pop, nothing had ever been that big. Epstein immediately regretted his decision and attempted to renegotiate the contract, and after 3 years, the deal was settled out of court. Craig Cross wrote in his book, The Beatles Day by Day, Song by Song, Record by Record, even if the Beatles weren't the first band to profit from merchandising, they were certainly the first band to be ripped off by it. They lost millions. The Beatles offered other merchandise too, so they sold candy bars and Ringo wigs, but nothing was as long-lasting as the Beatles t-shirt, which eventually made its way to my local mall, the Delia store, in fact, in 2008, where I would buy one that I think said, all you need is love on it. It was green, and it was a V-neck, and it was very slim fitting, went down to my hips, and was meant to be styled with skinny jeans. Definitely a moment in time. The concert t-shirt has been also widely attributed to promoter and entrepreneur Bill Graham. The story goes, Ira Sokoloff, who worked as an advertising agent, once asked Graham to design a full-page ad for the Allman Brothers performance at the Nassau Coliseum in Long Island in 1973. This ad was intended to run in the Village Voice. Sokoloff then decided to print the ad on a dozen t-shirts as a gift for the band and its management. However, the band loved the shirts so much that they asked Sokoloff to sell them at the show. Sokoloff does not remember how many t-shirts they sold that night exactly, but he recalls that they, quote, were all pleasantly surprised. Soon after, probably because he saw how profitable it was, Graham started making shirts for every concert and tour he promoted. His company, Winterland Productions, became one of the most prominent merchandising companies in the United States. Beforehand, t-shirts were sold mainly in stalls at state fairs. Shirts could be made to order with self-adhesive cloth letters or flocking.
I ordered a t-shirt with my name on it.
Here it is, your Kermit the Frog t-shirt.
That says Kermit the Gorf.
What?
Graphic designer Arturo Vega remembers making the first Ramones t-shirt at a fair in the Midwest. It was a white ringer t-shirt with red flocking letters. Vega notably designed the Ramones logo, and his involvement with the band as art director earned him the title of Fifth Ramone. However, when the band's record company refused to pay for him to fly on their first tour to California in 1976, Vega decided to sell t-shirts to pay his way. As Easby and Oliver reported, at $3 a pop, the screen-printed shirts flew out the door. The iron-on transfer process became popular in the 1970s, which increased the availability of music t-shirts. There are actually several types of vintage iron-on transfers, so there's plastisol, ink transfer, wax transfer, sublimation transfer, and glitter decals. These processes made it easier to mass-produce designs, and t-shirt shops would open up where you could pick your logo and choose your shirt color and size and basically just like customize your shirt in-house. As this writer Matt reflects on his blog, T-Shirt Time Machine, I remember getting my brother a Ghostbusters tee for his birthday in 1984. Iron-ons are inexpensive to print and easy to store. Think about it this way. You could have a couple of boxes of t-shirts, 150 different iron-on transfer designs, a heat press, and you could have an entire business, all in a pretty small space. The downside for these iron-on methods is longevity. So plastisol, for instance, tends to flake and peel over time. So nowadays, t-shirts are mostly screen printed. But the DIY nature of band tees is probably why so many people liked them so much in the first place. Like, don't get me wrong, it's nice to buy an official tee, right? It's also easy to create your own with websites like Zazzle and Custom Ink. And also, like, the t-shirt is probably the most easy to customize and DIY yourself. Merchandise like Beatles bubblegum or Ringo wigs, probably a lot more difficult. So despite merchandise being around for decades, Samuel Hine puts the responsibility of the merch boom in the 2010s, at least in part, on Kanye West, or Ye, specifically with his 2013 Yeezus tour. So for this tour, artist Wes Lang and designer Virgil Abloh were tasked with creating designs for the t-shirts. The resulting t-shirts had a Yeezus logo with skeleton designs and the phrase, "God wants you." As Hine recollects, the Yeezus merch sparked a movement. Fans were cleaning the merch stands, sure, but the real innovation came a few tour dates later when the Yeezus gear hit PacSun. You no longer had to fight through the crowds at a concert to get your hands on it. You could just go to your local mall. The merch arms race was now officially on. So Yeezus marked a transition in which tour merchandise could now become retail goods. They even could become luxury retail goods. A few years later, Justin Bieber collaborated with Fear of God's Jerry Lorenzo on merch for his Purpose tour that was then sold at Barney's and V-Files that summer. And Rihanna released anti-merch at the boutique Colette in Paris. It's therefore unsurprising and maybe even expected that once shown to be profitable, everyone and their mother would jump onto the merch wagon. Restaurants, cafes, newspapers, museums, even the MTA, which is New York's public transit, has merch for every subway line. So the question I should ask is, why do people even buy merchandise? For music artists, I understand, but for restaurants and for corporations, like, what's the big idea? Isn't this all starting to feel a little billboard-esque? So actually, when I was digging into it, the free advertisement aspect of it is partially the reason, or at least was the original reason, for many consumers during the pandemic to rep local merch. When many establishments had to close their doors or lost most of their business because of quarantining and social distancing measures, one way that many of them were able to still keep afloat was via merch sales. Places like Merch for Relief cropped up during the pandemic to sell limited edition hoodies and tees to raise money for restaurants that could no longer make rent. Stella Bugbee wrote about this larger trend of repping New York City establishments as Zizmorecore, named after Dr. Jonathan Zizmore, who in the 1980s released an onslaught of subway ads featuring his face and his promise of beautiful, clear skin. Bugbee writes, "I often longed for the era of New York I had grown up in, Zizmore City, pre-globalization, pre-Starbucks. Maybe there was no High Line, but my parents, school teachers, could afford to buy a house and see Les Mis once in a while." Zizmorecore is about wearing merch from places that feel truly authentic to New York. Its only rock-solid rule is that the thing you're repping could not exist in the same way in another city. So I've lived in New York City for the past 5 years, and I have no reference to how other cities dealt with the pandemic, but what I saw in New York was a sense of community and trying to keep these small businesses alive, and also like a greater appreciation for these establishments as hubs of social life that we all lost for months. Well, some of us lost. The more cynical read for why we're all repping merch is that we are all brands and therefore need to advertise our tastes and personalities in a commodifiable way. And maybe that's too cynical. After all, merch is a great conversation starter. Maybe sometimes when we're wearing like a Hereditary t-shirt, we're hoping that someone who has also liked the movie will come over and talk to us about it. Maybe if we're a straight guy wearing an intersectional feminist tote bag, we're hoping for a woman to ask us out. Elijah Funk, co-founder of Online Ceramics, which often puts out t-shirt collab merch, explains, "It's such an easy way to communicate to strangers, hey, we might have something to talk about. It is social collateral. Merch is part of a conversation that's happening actively everywhere all the time." So I actually have an example about this. I had a very nice experience when I was in London. I was walking through Hampstead Heath, which is one of my favorite parks in London. I would recommend going there over Hyde Park any day. And anyway, I was wearing like a vintage Yankees jacket. And there was this group of older people walking in front of me, two couples. And one of the men turns around and he's like, "Oh, you can go ahead of us. We're old and we're walking slowly." So I walk by them. And as I'm walking past them, I overhear him say, "Oh, she's wearing a Yankees jacket." And I just felt like maybe because I'd seen so many Yankees baseball caps in London that meant absolutely nothing, or at least it meant nothing to me. I turned around and I was like, "Oh yeah, like I live in New York." And he goes, "Oh wow, I grew up in New York." And we got to talking for a little bit, actually. So he grew up in Cobble Hill in the 70s, but then moved upstate later in life. He was on vacation with his wife, and they were heading to Paris the following week. It was actually like a really lovely conversation that I wouldn't have had if I wasn't wearing a Yankees jacket and if he, didn't comment on it.
Because he views it all as merch. That's merchandise.
So as I mentioned before, merch is everywhere now. Beauty brands are producing hats, restaurants are producing tote bags, film distribution company A24 is producing makeup kits. Merch is quite literally everywhere. And the price points can also run up depending on the item. For example, as part of Priscilla promo, A24 collaborated with jewelry designer Jay Hanna to recreate Priscilla Presley's heart-shaped locket for $1,280. The way that A24 has launched itself from like a film studio to a whole brand is pretty impressive. When I'm on TikTok, I always see like these college students dressing up as A24 characters at parties. The A24 subreddit has over 175,000 members, and their limited drop merchandise doubles in value on resale sites. And then also like the stereotype of an A24 superfan has become a meme all in itself. Before the rise of A24, no one would think about movie production companies in this way. In 2017, Robert Pattinson even told GQ for their article on A24, "It's crazy that there's an article about a distribution company. That's completely nuts." KJ Rothweiler made the comparison to Vulture in 2022. "No one's rocking a Focus Features hoodie." I think maybe now, in the aftermath of A24 popularity and the subsequent awareness of other media brands, someone would absolutely rock a Focus Features hoodie. Because I'm not gonna lie, I considered buying a Janus Films tote bag last year from the Criterion online store. Maybe still will, but I just feel like tote bags are in abundance and no one should buy a tote bag, really, because they just show up to you for free. So what's the point? But A24 hasn't fully commodified in the sense that they still only release limited drops, which has stayed true to the ephemeral and exclusive origins of merchandise. As Samuel Hine writes for GQ, you want it to be one of a small, hardcore group of fans to have earned those stripes. But other companies have treated merch less like an of-the-moment hot ticket item and more like a normal retail product, evident with the widespread adoption of pre-orders and drop-shipping e-commerce models. Meaning, as Hines says, the only thing limiting merch quantity was how many people were willing to buy and then wait several weeks for a Bernie Rage tee, a Dark Brandon coffee mug, an Astro World hoodie, or a Cactus Jack X McDonald's pillow in the shape of a chicken nugget. The scarcity model, once the key to the intertwined rise of merchant streetwear, was becoming a thing of the past. Lauren Schlossman, co-host of Throwing Fits, says, "Merch used to actually mean something. Now it's more of a broad stroke signifier that represents some type of non-specific message about what you care about. A billboard that says you live in New York or spent 2 years walking around Silver Lake or whatever."
See, you love this t-shirt. It lets you say everything you want to say.
At the same time, fashion has always kind of prioritized exclusivity, so it's unsurprising that for the fashion-conscious elite New Yorkers who can afford it, logos are out, and clean minimalist brands like The Row, Kate, and Loro Piana are in. But speaking of quiet luxury, so Hein actually finishes his essay talking about the Loewe Challengers I Told Ya t-shirt that the brand gifted him. And just a disclaimer, I bought the shirt with my hard-earned money with no regrets, but Jonathan Anderson, if you are watching, I'd like to let you know I'd love to be on that PR list. Okay, so if you haven't seen the movie, the t-shirt is essentially merch. Anderson costume designed the film, and the t-shirt is a replica of the one that gets worn by Zendaya and Josh O'Connor on screen. The design itself is based on a t-shirt that JFK Jr. wore in the 1980s, and Loewe smartly recreated those photographs for their campaign as well. The original t-shirt was allegedly a reference to the I Told You So buttons at JFK's 1961 inauguration. So the shirt is basically double merch, and also a nod at quiet luxury through its Kennedy affiliation, its tennis affiliation through Challengers, and of course, its $330 price tag. As Andrew Kuo believes, at some point the merch craze is going to get fired back up. All it takes is one or two tees. All we need is something to inspire us again. I think the I Told You shirt is really the perfect merch shirt because it's a direct copy of a costume garment. And as a costume design enthusiast myself, I will always try to get my hands on these products within reason. So it's a high fashion product. It carries multiple references, and it's not so obvious to someone who hasn't seen the movie. These are all ways that I've justified in my head to spend money on this t-shirt. But, the best kind of merch to me is like an inside joke. Yet Hein writes, I put the tee at the top of my dresser drawer. Whatever effect it might have on the wider merch world, it had a profound effect on me. For the first time in recent memory, I couldn't wait to wear a t-shirt that tied together a bunch of threads I found meaningful. The feeling didn't last long. The first time I threw mine on, I was barely out my front door when I saw another guy wearing one just like it. So it makes me wonder how many of the I Told You shirts being worn in public are authentic Loewe ones versus copies made on Zazzle or sold on Etsy, and whether the DIY aspect of t-shirt making that people once loved has ultimately led to the oversaturation and downfall of the merch shirt as a whole. As an aside, if you're wondering how people are able to legally make unofficial merch, I would suggest checking out my video on dupes. But basically, it's just very hard to police, especially when it comes to unofficial movie merch. Production companies have a very unorganized ownership structure, which makes it even more difficult to police the duping. But all of this has also made me wonder why we even care about exclusivity anyway if merch was once supposed to help us find like-minded community. Emily North makes an interesting point in her newsletter Angel Cake on the death of merch conversation. I do constantly feel the reverberation of the lack of community in all aspects of life, spanning from where we eat, to what we wear, to what we watch and read. The aversion to be a small part of a mass group of people who share the same affinity for something is nothing more than an elitist identity crisis ripened, as learned from personal experience and reflection. I think there are definitely people in the fashion space who won't wear something that everyone else is wearing as a way to hold on to their own individuality or individualism. I think I do this subconsciously too. I also think to give some people the benefit of the doubt, because merch has developed to become a more high fashion product, duping it can feel more like design theft in a way, something that a lot of people in the high fashion circuit are annoyed by. So if there's someone who feels really strongly against dupes and they see a lot of people wearing the same limited edition t-shirt, they'd recognize that a good number of them are probably dupes. And I can see why they'd want to avoid taking part in the whole system by avoiding that shirt altogether. I feel like under these individualistic circumstances, though, the merch that fashion-conscious people will still wear are more niche and less likely to become oversaturated. So, for instance, there's actually a whole market for unofficial merchandise for older movies, which I'm really into, honestly. I was looking around at some of these web pages and I was maybe I will be adding to cart. One brand is And After That, which is a clothing company that makes artful merch for movies that are no longer showing in theaters. So right now they sell a t-shirt with a still from Y Tu Mama Tambien, which is a 2001 movie directed by Alfonso Cuarón. And they also have mesh shorts that feature The Phantom Thread, which is a 2017 movie directed by Paul Thomas Anderson. Other brands that make tasteful bootleg merch include Fantasy Initiative, Director Fits, and Morning Glory. These brands also make clothing that look good on their own, even if you're not familiar with the movies, which definitely also helps.
In hopes of distracting themselves from the pathetic emptiness of their meaningless
consumer-driven lives.
But maybe the desire for exclusivity is less about wanting to be individual and more about like a general distaste for how meaningless aesthetics have become. On one front, a lot of merch, especially the memeified ones, is ironic, sort of like attending a Pitbull concert. Are you wearing a Pitbull concert tee to be ironic, or are you wearing one because you genuinely like him as an artist? No shade to Pitbull, I just saw on TikTok there was a trend of people going to Pitbull concerts ironically. But it also could be a little bit of both, because I'm a firm believer that if you love something ironically enough, you start to love it with sincerity at some point. What this translates to, though, is a modification of what merch represents. It's no longer clear what a person's tastes are. In the 90s and 2000s, wearing a shirt you didn't fully align with would be unthinkable. Wearing a shirt of a brand you never heard of was like shameful poser behavior. Hence the whole meme, oh, you love a band? Name 3 of their albums.
Fugazi?
What?
The band on your shirt.
Oh. Huh. Cool picture.
Casey Lewis, writer of the After School newsletter, which chronicles Gen Z trends, explains what shifted. Now, many of the trending aesthetics we see are kind of the definition of poser. Cottagecore, fairycore, people are trying on these identities that they aren't, but there's no shame associated with it now. As an example, costume designer Jordy Scheinberg talked to GQ about her experience on the set of You Are So Not Invited to My Bat Mitzvah. She said that whenever production wrapped up for the day, she noticed that all the kids would change into similar variations of the same outfit to go home in. Pajama pants and a hot pink Nirvana crewneck sweatshirt that retails at Urban Outfitters for $79. But when she asked the kids if any of them listened to or liked Nirvana, the consensus was no. Almost every major retailer sells Nirvana merch now. H&M, Hot Topic, Target, Abercrombie & Fitch. The list goes on, and that's not even to include all the drop shippers on AliExpress and Etsy selling unofficial ones. And maybe because of its accessibility, tweens see the sweatshirt less as like a covetable item associated with a mythic band, but as just another fashion trend like the strawberry dress or barrel-legged jeans. According to the New York Times critic John Caramanica, this is a good thing. Cross-generationally popular merch is a sign of the source material's potency. He says, whether it was Nirvana or Thrasher or whatever, they won. They formed a cultural identity that was so powerful that it outlasted the actual thing. Out of 100 kids who are under 20 wearing a Nirvana shirt, maybe 5 of them go research the band and they find something fascinating and get really into it. That to me is far more interesting than being on the churlish end of things and being like, you don't know in utero. But Nirvana sweatshirts were not the first merch to get worn by posers, so to speak. As Caramanica alludes to, in the late 2010s, everyone and their grandmother, including myself, wore Thrasher t-shirts. Thrasher is a skateboard magazine, and the associated tees and sweats were rocked by skaters, celebrities like Justin Bieber, Rihanna, and Tyler, the Creator, and Instagram baddies alike. I actually had a situationship with a skater because no one actually has a serious relationship with a skater. And during this time period, I will literally never forget when I was trying to explain what cultural appropriation was in a racial context. By the way, my skater situationship was like, oh, so it's like when girls wear Thrasher tees. Anyways, I was 19, which is a fake year. It should be like a year when you're allowed to make whatever mistakes you want to make. But the sentiment against non-skaters wearing skate merch was echoed throughout the whole community, hopefully with a little more self-awareness from some people. But you never know. Thrasher's late editor Jake Phelps told Hypebeast in 2016, "We don't send boxes to Justin Bieber or Rihanna or those fucking clowns. The pavement is where the real shit is. Blood and scabs, does it get realer than that?" Maybe nothing is clearer that merch has lost its meaning than with Emily Oberg's company Sporty and Rich, which features t-shirts and sweaters with logos of wellness clubs that literally don't even exist. While I wouldn't consider Sporty and Rich clothes as merchandise, it makes fun of and masquerades as merchandise. Forever 21, Hollister, and a number of other brands have also jumped onto the trend of like making fake merch. Sporty and Rich is definitely profitable. Nathan Taylor Pemberton wrote a profile on Oberg last year and wrote, "The brand wouldn't show me anything to confirm revenue figures, but it is adamant that the operation has been profitable from day one and is targeting to hit $100 million in revenue within the next 3 years." I'm also like not trying to shade Sporty and Rich because I actually think the whole operation is genius. And also I know for a fact that many designers, even the big ones, copy vintage designs. So what Oberg is doing is not particularly new or sinister. James Harris, co-host of the Throwing Fits podcast, also adds, "I think anyone who criticizes Sporty and Rich's logos and graphics don't know what streetwear is. It's precisely what this subculture was rooted in." And maybe repping fake corporations is better than repping actual corporations, you know? Something that tends to get lost in this conversation is that while we may choose to wear a shirt that says Erewhon on it because we want to signify our own taste to the world, that taste is directly in relation to a larger entity. As Linny Krall writes for Eater, brand loyalty is just a hop skip from the corporations are people rhetoric that disenfranchises the American public whenever bottom lines demand it. Most of the companies repped on my mug rack are too small to influence national politics, but still, it's a slippery slope, loving things that want our money. David Foster Wallace wrote that an ad that pretends to be art is, at absolute best, like somebody who smiles warmly at you only because he wants something from you. For us, brand loyalty may just be about love, but for the brand, it's always going to be about something else.
Brand new day, brand new merch. Rubik's Cube with my face on it.
In 1990, Fugazi released a song called Merchandise with the lyrics, "You are not what you own," in the reprise. As part of their ethics, they never sold merch. Ironically, bootleggers started producing "This is not a Fugazi t-shirt" to capitalize on fans. A lot of merchandise is overpriced fast fashion, and the mass production of said merch these days has also led to tons of waste. For example, every year, the NFL sells Super Bowl merch of the winning team, which normally includes caps, t-shirts, and sweatshirts. Sam Dean and Jamie Ding covered this merch business model in 2022 when the Los Angeles Rams were set to play against the Cincinnati Bengals. They noted there were two piles of merch, one side that celebrated the Rams win and one side that celebrated the Bengals win. As they write, "If the Rams take home the Lombardi Trophy on Sunday, all that Bengals gear will instantly become unsellable, at least in the eyes of the NFL. If the Bengals manage to best the Rams in their own house, the Rams kit will transform into wearable lies as soon as the whistle blows." So what they end up doing is they send a shipment of the losing team's Super Bowl swag to a nonprofit called Good 360, who also receive shipments for the NFC and AFC championship games and the World Series. Good 360 then bundles all the losing team's merch together into a shipping container that they send overseas to people who could use free clothes. The places are undisclosed, but Charlee Rudolph, the company's chief marketing officer, told the reporters, "What I can say is they end up in countries in Africa, the Middle East, Asia, and South America." The LA Times article writes about this nonprofit pretty neutrally, but I think anyone who works in sustainability would find this statement a little questionable. There's just like a lot of cases of fast fashion companies and charity organizations dumping clothes in the global south, which has not only led to ecological destruction of these countries, but also hurts their local economies as well. Like in 2017, Rwanda, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, South Sudan, and Burundi tried to phase out imports of secondhand clothing and shoes because of the way they undermined domestic efforts to develop their own textile industries. The country sought to ban these imports entirely by 2019. The US, of course, being the US, didn't allow it by threatening to remove these countries from a trade deal. I'm not saying that Good 360 is a bad nonprofit. I really don't know anything about them. But I think regardless, a lot of merchandise, especially cheaply made ones that are mass produced for specific events, are worn once or twice by people in rich countries and then dumped onto poor countries to deal with. And also, like, I think it is just weird that, like, these countries are taking the leftovers that, like, America doesn't want. Related but not related, I have mixed feelings about music concerts where people are encouraged to dress up too. So like take Coachella, for example. Every year, I see people on social media buying new fast fashion outfits to wear to the music festival, and a lot of the times, these clothes are only bought for like one-time wear and then discarded after the event. In 2019, Census-wide found that single-use outfits for music festivals such as Glastonbury and Coachella alone account for approximately $307 million worth of items per year, or about 7.5 million outfits worn only once. Anna Chen writes for the Duke Chronicle, "This rapid overconsumption and use of fast fashion isn't a trend exclusive to festivals as it applies to the concert industry at large. More and more tours are being associated with certain aesthetics and an unofficial dress code, driving many people to buy brand new themed outfits. Harry Styles' Love on Tour brings to mind images of boas, cowboy boots, pink, and an undeniable influence from the 70s, while Taylor Swift's Eras Tour has had fans scrambling to find outfits to pay homage to their favorite eras." Don't even get me started on Halloween, which is like, you know, I'm veering off like the concert merchandise thing, but it's a related phenomenon of people just investing in single-use outfits. And you know, I say I have mixed feelings about this because I do get the love of costume parties and getting dressed up. I love it so much, but it's hard to reconcile that interest with the environmental waste. Again, I don't really go to concerts, but my ethos for Halloween these past few years is trying to find like everything secondhand and also making costumes with clothes that I either already have or would wear again after Halloween is over. I also think that more music artists should be trying to embrace sustainability as much as possible. So I've been like really loving Billie Eilish lately. I like her new album. But also in her recent interview with Billboard, she talks a lot about her sustainability initiatives, which I honestly had no idea about before because I didn't really listen to her music before. But for example, last year, she helped launch and fund Reverb's music decarbonization project, which aimed to eliminate carbon emissions created by the music industry. She partially powered her headlining set at Lollapalooza with zero emissions battery systems, charged on a temporary solar farm that was set up on the site also. And on the merch front, she told the interviewer that she is looking for more sustainable suppliers for her clothing. She reduces the number of drops and is trying to make eco-friendlier vinyls out of recycled vinyl and sugarcane shrink wrap. She goes on to talk about the issue with vinyls because if you don't know, artists or music labels, I guess, tend to release multiple vinyls of the same album to help boost the album to a #1 slot. Billie explains it's some of the biggest artists in the world making fucking 40 different vinyl packages that have a different unique thing just to get you to keep buying more. It's so wasteful and it's irritating to me that we're still at a point where you care that much about your numbers and you care that much about making money. And it's all your favorite artists doing that shit. Billie's like definitely not perfect. No one is. And I don't think she claims to be either. I think she's just like trying to bring awareness to like the situation of it all because like she still produced several vinyl variants of her album Happier Than Ever. And also while recycled vinyl is better, it still ends up in landfills unable to biodegrade. But what I do like about her is that she is making these like small adjustments. She's bringing awareness to a situation, which is better than so many other big artists who will happily just take the paycheck without considering any repercussions. As a last point, I think the interesting side effect of globalization and a lot of merch being produced in different countries, being disposed of in different countries, and on a less nefarious front, just like, you know, being purchased online in different countries, is that merch also carries different meanings now based on environment. For example, I read this 2020 Wired article on the Linkin Park t-shirt craze in China, and basically for a number of years leading up to the article, a dark purple t-shirt with Linkin Park written in blocky slanted font and the album title Minutes to Midnight in smaller letters was circling the Chinese streetwear scene to the point where Reddit users were posting on the r/Shanghai subreddit asking what this was all about. The journalist Noelle Matier reports, the album Minutes to Midnight is Linkin Park's third and far from its most popular. Still, given its rapid popularity on the world's largest internet marketplace, the Linkin Park Minutes to Midnight logo may very well be one of the most popular t-shirt designs in the world. Similarly, the Playboy brand has also taken new meaning in the Chinese fashion scene. Tiffany App, Asia correspondent for Women's Wear Daily, says the Playboy brand is pretty much on life support in the US, but in China, they have licensed the Playboy logo out to so many products that have nothing to do with the original premise of the sexy Playboy bunny. It's on socks, and there are Playboy cafes in tier 3 and 4 cities, and it's turned cutesy. Playboy, like Linkin Park, is an example of how brands can take on different meanings in new markets, sometimes completely divorced from the original core product. American hegemony means our culture is like everywhere. We like to think that the availability of merch online has led to a sort of merch monoculture, but that can't be further from the truth. For all I know, wearing a Yankees ball cap in London has maybe a different cultural significance than wearing one in New York. Beforehand, the purpose of wearing merchandise seemed to be an invitation for someone else with the same interests to come over and talk to you, and there was a very concrete shared culture. But now it feels like it's an invitation for just about anyone to say anything to you at all, and just because you're both wearing Nirvana sweatshirts doesn't mean you'd relate in the same exact way. I actually think this is a really positive thing as we got more isolated from one another and fragmented into social media echo chambers. Merch can be an easy conversation starter. As an example of my own experience, once again, the other day, because I was wearing this shirt and I was walking through the subway. This was like actually kind of late at night, so I wasn't really in the mood to talk to anyone anyway. But this guy, like, he was just walking past me and he was like, cool shirt. And he had this kind of earnestness that I could tell he hadn't seen the movie. Like, he didn't know what this shirt was referencing, but it was just like really sweet. He was just like, I told ya. And then just kept walking. And, you know, like, maybe if I was like in a different headspace, if it wasn't like 10 p.m., I'd be like, maybe we could have like chatted a little bit and I could have said like what this shirt was from. And he could confirm or deny whether or not he saw the movie, but I don't think he did. And yeah, it could have just been like a nice conversation starter. So even if someone doesn't know it's merch, merch does do something. That was like such a weird sentence. Anyway, this is the end of the video. Thank you all so much for watching. Let me know if you own any merch, why you bought it, if there's like a story there, or if you just wanted to participate in a trend. No shame here. I did own a Thrasher t-shirt after all that I bought from Zoomies. You know, if they wanted to gatekeep Thrasher so much, they shouldn't have sold it at Zoomies, okay? Anyway, I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you next time. Bye!
Send $8.50 to Elvira T-shirt, Post Office Box 38246, Los Angeles, California, 90038. The all-new Elvira T-shirt. It's more than just a T-shirt, it's a way of life!